Trillions of innocent lives had been extinguished as the ruthless insectoid Trill butchered their way across the galaxy, conquering half the known worlds until they encountered an ancient human warship, seemingly appearing out of nowhere, ready to fight for the survival of their species. The terrified screams of defenseless civilians echoed through the void of space. Trill invasion forces tore through the few remaining pockets of resistance, overwhelming the Coalition's last major stronghold with overwhelming numbers and superior firepower. Overlord Juno clicked his mandibles in glee, viewing live feeds of the slaughter from the flagship's command console. "Krell, prepare the armada. We will chase down the fleeing refugees and exterminate these pathetic humans they seek shelter with." Krell scampered over to the Overlord. The second-in-command reported, "Our forces have obliterated the Coalition's defenses. Their survivors flee for the Orion Cluster, home of the humans, a primitive race not seen for centuries. Trill records speak of them with dread." Juno snarled, "Superstitious nonsense from a bygone era. Ready the fleet. Today we snuff out their last spark of hope. Tomorrow we cement the Trill as this galaxy's supreme power forevermore," Overlord Juno proclaimed. The bridge erupted in cheers. Chittering and clamoring voices raised in unison. The mighty Trill Armada's engines roared to life. Countless warships powered up, their thrusters burning bright against the inky blackness. The might of an empire was bearing down on the last bastion of the Coalition, pursuing the fleeing refugees. Their mission was to eradicate all remaining resistance, starting with the mysterious humans rumored to still inhabit the Orion Cluster after centuries of isolation. The Trill would not stop until every last trace of their enemies had been wiped from existence. The ocean planet of Aquaria hung in the void, its sapphire seas glittering beneath a blanket of stars. On one of the floating kelp farms that dotted the surface, Billy Johnson slept fitfully in his simple dwelling. The old veteran's dreams were haunted by memories of the human Trill war from centuries past, the screams of the dying, the flash of energy weapons, the chittering war cries of the insectoid foe. Billy jolted awake as his comm unit blared an urgent alert. He grabbed it and saw a priority message from the Aquarian president herself. His blood ran cold as he read the text. A massive fleet of refugee ships had arrived in system, fleeing the Trill, the same Trill that Billy had fought so long ago. He lurched out of bed and quickly threw on his clothes. Stepping outside, he could already see the glow of ships descending through the atmosphere, far more than Aquaria had seen in centuries. Billy ran for his shuttle and punched the ignition, blasting off towards the capital. By the time he arrived, the refugees were already landing in droves. Spaceports and fields were filled with a chaos of ships and panicked aliens of every species. Billy pushed his way through the crowds and rushed into the Capitol Tower, heading straight for the president's office. The scene inside was grim. The president and her cabinet watched footage of hordes of refugees pouring from the ships, all bearing tales of the ruthless Trill war machine. They spoke of entire worlds butchered, civilizations exterminated without mercy. "It gets worse," the defense minister said. "The refugee fleet was followed by a Trill frigate. They're in orbit now, broadcasting demands that we turn over the refugees. They say they'll destroy Aquaria if we don't comply." The president turned to Billy, her face ashen. "You fought the Trill before. What can we do?" Billy's jaw clenched. "Not a damn thing. The 3 human colonies out here barely have a few thousand people between them. A single Trill frigate could glass us all in an hour, and there's surely a whole fleet of the bastards coming." "There must be something," the president pleaded desperately. "Some other option." Billy was silent for a long moment, his mind racing. Finally he spoke. "There might be. One ship. Back in the war we had a battleship. Biggest and strongest we ever built. It went missing in the final battle. We thought it was destroyed, but we never found any wreckage." "You think this ship might still be out there somewhere?" the president asked. "It's possible. And if it is, it could be the only thing strong enough to give us a fighting chance against the Trill. Then we have to find it. Send out every ship we—" "No," Billy cut her off. "We have to assume there are Trill spies mixed in with those refugees. If they figure out what we're doing, they'll hunt down that ship too. It has to be me, and I have to go alone." The president nodded grimly. "Very well." Minutes later, Billy was sprinting across the spaceport tarmac, dodging confused refugees. He leapt into the first small warp shuttle he found and fired up the engines. As the shuttle blasted into the sky, he looked out the viewport at the battered refugee ships and the gleaming Trill frigate hanging ominously in orbit. Somewhere out there among the stars, a legend waited, and he had to find it before it was too late. The shuttle jumped to warp, vanishing into the void. Billy punched the warp drive, his little shuttle vanishing into the swirling vortex of hyperspace. The lost human warrior hurtled towards the heart of the Erebus Nebula, where the retribution had last been seen centuries ago during humanity's desperate stand against the Trill. It was a fool's hope, Billy knew, but a fool's hope was all they had left. The shuttle shuddered as it dropped back into real space, the ethereal violet clouds of the nebula stretching out before him. Billy's heart raced as he scanned the debris field that had once been a battlefield. The twisted husks of human and Trill ships hung suspended in the void, flash-frozen relics of a long-ago war. Come on, Billy muttered, his eyes flicking over the sensor readouts. He meticulously scanned each wreck, searching for any trace of the retribution, but found nothing. Minutes stretched into hours as he combed the graveyard, desperation mounting with each negative result. Just as he was about to give up, a dense cluster of contacts lit up the sensors. It was deep in the nebula's heart, where the clouds were thickest. Billy swallowed hard and aimed his shuttle into the swirling mists. Visibility dropped to near zero as he crept forward, the shuttle's hull groaning as it scraped past jagged spars of ancient metal that could slice it to ribbons in an eye blink. Suddenly the shuttle lurched to a halt, caught in an unseen grip. Billy's head snapped up, his eyes widening as a massive shape emerged from the nebula. It was a warship, battered but intact, fully 3 times the size of the most feared Trill dreadnoughts, and it had him in a tractor beam. The behemoth reeled him in, drawing the shuttle into a cavernous hangar bay. Billy grabbed his sidearm and disembarked warily, but there was no welcoming party, hostile or otherwise. The ship seemed deserted. Feeling like an intruder in a tomb, Billy made his way to the bridge. It was a vast chamber clearly designed for humans, dominated by an enormous command chair. Billy approached it cautiously, as if it might bite. When he finally slid into the seat, a holographic display burst to life, bathing him in spectral light. "Identity confirmed," a female voice said. "Welcome aboard, Admiral Johnson." Billy nearly fell out of the chair. "What? No, there's some mistake. I'm no admiral." "You are Admiral William Johnson, commander of the battleship Retribution," the voice replied calmly. "During the final battle, emergency protocols were enacted to wipe portions of your memory engrams in a last effort to protect this ship and its critical technology." Billy wanted to argue, but deep down he felt the truth of it in his bones. Fragmented memories swirled at the edges of his consciousness, the bridge shaking as Trill weapons pounded the shields, the stench of burning circuitry, the agonized screams of the wounded and dying. He shook himself back to the present. The display identified the ship as the Retribution. He was on the lost battleship, and apparently he had been its commanding officer. "Admiral," the voice prompted, "what are your orders?" Billy stood slowly, squaring his shoulders, his jaw set with determination as he faced the viewscreen, the Erebus Nebula swirling beyond. He thought of the terrified refugees, the smug Trill in orbit over Aquaria, the trillions more out there facing extinction at the hands of the merciless insectoids. His eyes hardened. "Prepare for battle," Admiral William Johnson said. "We've got a galaxy to save." The Retribution burst from the Erebus Nebula, its engines howling with strain. On the bridge, Billy gripped the command chair as the mighty warship hurtled towards Aquaria. The viewscreen lit up with sensor readings. A massive Trill invasion fleet had just entered the system. "How long until we reach Aquaria?" Billy demanded. 4 minutes, Admiral," the AI replied. "But the Trill will arrive first. Aquaria's defense fleet is already engaging." Billy's jaw clenched. He pushed the engines to their limit. the ship shuddering around him, but it wasn't enough. As the Retribution finally dropped out of warp on the outskirts of the battle, it was chaos. The meager Aquarian ships fought valiantly, darting between the Trill warships, scoring hits where they could, but they were hopelessly outmatched. Trill beams sliced through their hulls like a scythe through wheat. "All weapons, fire at will!" Billy roared. The Retribution's arsenal lit up, a devastating salvo of missiles and directed energy beams lancing out. A dozen Trill destroyers vanished in blooms of fire, torn apart by the onslaught. On the bridge of the Trill flagship, Overlord Juno reeled back in shock. "What is that?" he hissed, staring at the impossible sensor readings. A human warship, larger and more powerful than anything in the Trill databases. "Bring all ships about," Juno commanded. "Converge on that ship. I want it destroyed." The Trill armada wheeled ponderously, reorienting to face this new threat head-on. The Retribution's revolutionary weapons and defenses proved devastating, Trill ships falling by the score. But the bugs adapted quickly, using their numbers to absorb the casualties and press the attack. Juno himself joined the fray, his personal command ship speeding into the heart of the battle. It was a swift and heavily armored dreadnought, designed for this very purpose. The two mighty warships dueled in a vicious dance, trading world-shattering broadsides as they wove through the chaos. On the Retribution's bridge, consoles exploded in showers of sparks. The lights flickered as the hull shuddered under the relentless assault. Damage reports flooded in. The ship was powerful, but not invincible, and Juno's flagship was a formidable foe. Billy gritted his teeth, his mind racing. Then a sudden flash of insight. The Retribution's main cannon, the most powerful directed energy weapon ever created, it had a weakness. A 0.5-second delay when the magnetic containment fields cycled. If Juno timed his shots just right. Fingers flying over the controls, Billy inputted a firing solution, gambling everything on one final shot. The main cannon began to charge, a rising hum that shook the entire ship. On the Trill flagship, Juno saw his chance. He lined up the killing blow, his weapons locking on. At that instant, the Retribution's containment field cycled. Billy launched himself from the command chair, slamming his hand down on the manual override. The main cannon fired, a searing lance of pure energy that speared straight through Juno's flagship and a dozen Trill ships behind it. The Trill fleet fell into chaos as Juno's crippled ship reeled away, trailing debris and venting atmosphere. But the Retribution had not emerged unscathed. Juno's final salvo had impacted during the containment field flux. Internal explosions ripped through the human warship. Fires raged out of control. Entire decks decompressed. The Retribution listed, dead in space. In the flickering darkness of the ruined bridge, Billy hauled himself back into the command chair, blood trickling down his face. He surveyed the carnage on the view screen. The Retribution had incapacitated Juno's flagship, decimated the Trill fleet. But at what cost? The human warship was itself all but destroyed. As the adrenaline faded, exhaustion and pain crashing over him in waves, Billy could only wonder, had it been enough? The Retribution hung dead in space, adrift amidst the debris of the shattered Trill armada. On the flickering bridge, Billy slumped in the command chair, his breaths coming in ragged gasps as the adrenaline faded and the pain of his wounds slammed into him like a freight train. He allowed himself a moment of weary relief, but it was short-lived. The sensors blared an urgent warning, a final Trill ship, a cloaked transport, making a desperate run for Aquaria's surface. "No," Billy rasped, forcing himself upright. "Sensors, what's it carrying?" The AI's response chilled his blood. Scans indicate a large thermonuclear device, yield a planetary extinction level. Billy's mind raced. The transport was too small and fast. With the Retribution's engines and weapons offline, they had no interceptors left to stop it. If that ship reached Aquaria... "There is one option, Admiral." The AI's calm voice cut through his rising panic. "We could overload the primary reactor core and plot a collision course. The resulting explosion would vaporize the transport." Billy closed his eyes. He knew what that meant. The reactor controls were manual. Someone would have to stay behind. He took a deep, shuddering breath. Then he pushed himself to his feet. "Do it. Set the collision course. I'll handle the reactor." Confirmed. Collision course plotted. Manual reactor overload sequence primed. Billy limped from the bridge, his hand pressed to the wound in his gut. Each step was agony, but he pushed through it. The ship shuddered around him as it entered Aquaria's upper atmosphere, friction turning the hull to fire. He reached the reactor chamber, a vast spherical room dominated by the pulsing core. He staggered to the control console. A plasma bolt sizzled over his head. Billy dove for cover as a squad of Trill soldiers swarmed into the chamber, weapons blazing. At their head was Overlord Juno, his face twisted with rage. "Johnson!" Juno roared over the chaos. "You think you've won? I'll burn your pathetic world to ashes." They traded shots, plasma bolts filling the air. Billy rolled, his old soldier instincts kicking in. His rifle clicked empty. Juno's did the same a moment later. The Trill warlord lunged, combat blades flashing. Billy met him head-on, the clash of metal on metal lost in the reactor's rising whine. They grappled, a brutal hand-to-hand brawl. Juno was strong, his insectoid exoskeleton absorbing blows that would break human bone. But Billy had a lifetime of warfare in his muscles. He pinned Juno against the observation window, the transport visible below, growing larger by the second. With a final surge of strength, he snapped the warlord's neck. But even as Juno went limp, Billy felt a cold sting in his gut. He looked down to see a poisoned dagger buried to the hilt. Juno's mandibles twitched in a dying sneer. "See you in hell, human!" Billy shoved the corpse away. His vision blurred as the poison raced through his veins. He staggered to the reactor console and slammed his hand down on the overload button. Klaxons blared. The core pulsed faster and faster, a building scream. Billy collapsed against the observation window, watching through dimming eyes as the Trill transport swelled to fill his view. A second sun bloomed in Aquaria's sky as the Retribution and the transport vanished in an apocalyptic fireball. From the surface, the people of Aquaria watched in awe and sorrow, knowing that their saviors had just made the ultimate sacrifice. In the weeks that followed, as the galaxy struggled to rebuild from the ashes of the Trill onslaught, the legend of Billy Johnson and the Retribution spread like wildfire. They became a symbol of hope in a galaxy that had all but forgotten the meaning of the word. But even as the Orion cluster celebrated its heroes and looked to the future with newfound optimism, a question lingered in the minds of many. The Trill had been defeated, but at a terrible cost. If another threat arose, would there be anyone left to stand against it? Had humanity's last, best hope for peace shone for the final time? Only one thing was certain: the future, as always, remained unwritten, and the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what the next chapter would bring. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.